In this video, I'm going to demonstrate how to install RJ45 heads. On the table, you can see the common tools used to install the heads. Here's a Cat 6 Ethernet patch cable. We're going to make something just like this. Behind it on the table, you can see some other patch cables, some Cat 5e patch cables. Here's some electrician scissors. We're going to use this to cut the cable and to score the outer sheathing. And here's a crimp tool. We're going to use this to crimp the RJ45 heads. It also has a smaller RJ11 inlet. That RJ11 is for telco cables. And you can see how the RJ45 head slides into the inlet. Here's a container of pass-through RJ45 heads. And here's a close-up of a pass-through RJ45 head. You can see my finger behind it as the light catches it. And this is a non-pass-through RJ45 head. This is a Cat 6 version. You can tell because the inlets are offset to accommodate the thicker gauge of the Cat 6 cable. And here's some RJ45 boots to make it look more factory and clean. This is the Ethernet keystone that we made in the last video. And here's another look at the RJ45 head. You can see the pins that protrude out of the top. Those pins are going to be clamped down with the crimp tool, and you can see that those pins don't let the RJ45 head insert into the keystone at the moment. To start off, we're just going to slide one of the RJ45 head boots on there. We're going to lightly score the outer sheathing of the Cat 5e cable that I'm using in this case. You should be using Cat 6 most likely. Cat 5's a bit cheaper. I'm going to use that for the demonstration. Gonna pull back the part of the outer sheathing that we scored, and then we're going to use the string that you can find inside to peel back the cable and then cut off the excess. Here we can see a diagram of an RJ45 head, the color code. You can see that it's white, orange, and then white, green, blue, white, blue, green, white, brown, and brown. We're going to emulate that same pattern here. Since all Cat 5e and Cat 6 cable is unshielded twisted pair UTP cable, we're going to untwist each pair of cable. And note that not all of it is unshielded. You can get shielded Cat 6 and Cat 5e. Here we're just making sure we have the correct pattern according to the color code. I just needed to move that green of the green pair of cable over to the right side of the blue pair. And here, to flatten out and straighten the cables and make them insert into the RJ45 head easier, we're just going to pull on the cable as we twist them or wiggle them. And next we're going to trim up the ends of the cable to make them square. Trim it down to about 1/2 inch. Try to keep a little bit of pressure behind the cables to keep them flat whenever you're handling them. And slide the cable into the head. And lastly, we're going to slide the RJ45 head into the RJ45 inlet of the crimp tool and squeeze the handle to crimp it down with the ratcheting mechanism. I usually give it a couple squeezes. When you squeeze the crimp tool, it presses in those gold colored pins at the end and also a clamp there towards the back end of the cable where the sheathing inserts into the RJ45 head. And lastly, slide the relief boot up over the end of the RJ45 head. And there you have it, a factory installed RJ45 head. And your RJ45 head makes a perfect connection into your Ethernet keystone. Okay, now we're going to do one more with a RJ45 pass-through head. We'll do this one a bit quicker. Peeling back the outer sheathing, trimming off the outer sheathing, shortening the cable, untwisting the cables, orienting the cables according to the color code, and flattening out the cables to prepare them to be inserted into the RJ45 head. Checking the color code. Trimming off some of the excess and squaring up the ends. The length isn't as important when you trim off the end of the cable when you're using an RJ45 pass-through head, because you're going to be able to control the length afterwards. You can see how the cable comes through the end of the RJ45 head. And you want to make sure that that outer sheathing, the white portion of the cable, comes all the way up there underneath of that clamp at the back end of the RJ45 head. If you look at the non-pass-through RJ45 head that I just previously did, I didn't trim it off enough. You can see how much it needs to be trimmed off. And we'll do another close-up here. Looking from the end of the outer sheathing to the end of the exposed cable, it's less than 1/2 of an inch. But while you're untwisting the cables and getting them oriented in the right color code, you'll want a little bit extra length there to play with. And here you can see that there's a guillotine-like blade on the back end of the RJ45 head crimp tool to cut off the excess part of the cables. Mine is a bit dull, so I don't rely on it, and I manually trim off the end of the cable and then just square them up and pull them back when I'm using an RJ45 pass-through head, which I don't often use. And last step, sliding on the relief boot. And here you have an RJ45 Ethernet cable with a pass-through head and a non-pass-through head with a factory look, and plugging it into an Ethernet keystone. And quick tip, if you're making a couple of these up in the field and you just want to keep them organized, you can use some of that excess cable as a quick cable tie. And thank you for watching.